afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. Today is Friday, August 5th, 2022. Lots of interesting news going on today. I just got off of a recording that you're going to want to watch with Brant Hadaway. Now, we talked to Brant earlier in the week about his appeal in the CDC case, along with Leslie Manookian of Health Freedom Defense Fund, healthfreedomdefense.org. But with the new developments in Florida, with Ron DeSantis suspending prosecutor Andrew Warren yesterday, and Andrew Warren's response, I thought, who better to get back in here but Brant Hadaway, who practices law in South Florida. And we had a great conversation about this. You're not going to want to miss this. That's in the news today. Andrew Warren lashing out, saying that this was about the Iowa caucuses, not about justice in Florida. Charlie Crist is going after him for that. I got a post up about that at hotair.com. But this is about an abuse of power by Warren in terms of prosecutorial discretion, and it's about the use of gubernatorial discretion by Ron DeSantis. So Brant and I go through what's at stake, what's happened, what's likely to happen next. A lot of very interesting stuff, and the Florida courts come into play here. The Florida State Senate comes into play. You're definitely going to want to watch that. The big news this morning, of course, was the jobs report. Huge surprise in the jobs report, 528,000 jobs added, showing that, at least providing an argument that we have not hit recession yet, that even though household income, real disposable personal income, I should make that clear, real disposable personal income has declined 5 quarters in a row, the economy as a whole is not in recession. At least the argument can be made because you're growing jobs at a phenomenal rate. We've actually now finally exceeded the level of employment that we had in February 2020, right before the pandemic hit. But that is a static comparison. The comparison that we should have is where we're at in terms of the population as it now stands. And we're still probably 2.5 million jobs shy, maybe 2.25 million jobs shy of where we need to be. Based on population growth. It depends on how you measure that. We had in 2020 and 2021, we added 3.8 million people to the U.S. population, plus whatever we've added this year. But just the 3.8, it would just say it's 4 million. At a 59% employment population ratio, we really should have added around 2.5 million jobs back in, on top of where we were at in February 2020. There's also some other anomalous things going on there. First off, with that rapid rate of job creation, you'd expect to see wages going up at a higher clip than it had been in the past because of competition. But actually, it's fairly static. It's not changed a whole lot, and it's still year on year 5.2% wage growth up against 9.3% inflation. So you're still seeing a significant amount of wage erosion in July. Even with those numbers, you're seeing a significant amount of wage erosion. Plus, 303,000 people moved to part-time for economic reasons. That is a very large number, and it's going in the opposite direction of what the total jobs added is telling us. Also, the workforce shrank by, 200 and something thousand. So there's a lot of odd anomalies in this. Not too many revisions, though, off the previous 2 months. I think the total was adding in 28,000 jobs for revisions over the last 2 months. I think next month's revisions will be interesting because at 528,000, that's usually a percentage band. So the revisions might be a little bit larger in August's job report for what happened in July. But that 528,000 is a really good number. It is a really good number. It's a surprising number. Even the New York Times was sort of preparing readers that this is not going to be really good today. And then it, of course, turned out to be very good. So the White House is going to claim economic success. So is the Federal Reserve, which means that they are going to feel a lot more comfortable with a lot more rapid increases in interest rates, which may, ironically, push us even further towards recession. A lot going on in that job report. So that was the big news here. The other thing that I think was interesting today, I've got a lot of different posts up, and there's a post about the other big news, of course, was Kyrsten Sinema signing on to the Manchin-Schumer Inflation Reduction Act. by changing out by eliminating the tax change on carried interest and changing the corporate minimum tax structure that was created in the original bill, 15% minimum, which was a flat rate. And then you had to pay, the corporations would have to pay the higher of two options. But Sinema asked for and got either deductions or exemptions. I'm not sure which it was that would apply to the corporate minimum tax rate too, which makes it sort of an odd minimum tax rate. The whole idea of a minimum tax rate is to have one calculation with exemptions and one calculation without. So if you got exemptions applying in both directions, that minimum tax rate is going to it can drop significantly lower. I don't know that Bernie Sanders is going to go along with that. I don't know that House progressives are going to go along with that. And I think that it's still likely that this thing is going to pass, but likely, I don't think it's a slam dunk. I think especially when it moves over to the House progressives have been very angry about having to just swallow whatever the Senate produces. And they have been very vocal about the fact that they want all of these components in a reconciliation bill, all the components from Build Back Better. Almost none of them are in here now, except for the climate, except for some much smaller climate change spending. And then these watered down tax changes, which is very different from what they envisioned this bill to be back in, last summer, a year ago. So can Nancy Pelosi hold that caucus together? She can only afford to lose 4 votes in the House for whatever the Senate passes. Assuming the Senate passes something, Pelosi can only afford to lose 4 votes. I still think it's more likely than not that it's going to pass. I'm not going to try to sell this as it's a dead issue. But I think Sanders' attack on this is significant. And even if it passes, it's not going to look like much. And by the way, YouGov has a new poll out. I read about that this afternoon. Only 12% of respondents in this poll think the Inflation Reduction Act will actually reduce inflation. 3 times as many people, 36%, think it will actually increase inflation. And only 1 in 5 Democrats think it will actually reduce inflation. So the branding they're putting on this is not working. It's still fairly popular, though. The bill itself is still fairly popular because of the components that are in it. But as a response to inflation, this thing is going to fall flat on the electorate. And I don't think this is going to give Democrats anywhere near the juice they think it's going to give them, even if it does pass before the reconciliation envelope expires. I also talk about the oddity of the official response to monkeypox, the missing guidances on human behavior in the monkeypox outbreak. The Washington Post is a little curious about that too. And so that was kind of a fun post to write because I went back and took a look, and the CDC, which is now in public officials, were saying, well, we don't really want to get involved in people's bedrooms. Well, they were right in your bedroom for the COVID outbreak. And a lot of that advice sounds like it's the same type of advice they should be giving in the monkeypox outbreak as well. We'll talk a little bit more about that. That'll be fun. And of course, Ala Pundit has got a good post coming up about collective freakout regarding abortion policy after the Kansas referendum failed on a constitutional change there. Be sure to read that. Got lots of stuff coming up, but coming up right now, Brant Hadaway from Davalier Law Group about Ron DeSantis, Andrew Warren, and the rule of law. You're gonna want to stick around for the whole thing. Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast on a Friday afternoon. And I know we talked to Brant Hadaway from the Davalier Law Group earlier this week about the CDC appeal of their court loss in Florida, and Brant and Leslie Manookian. We had a great conversation with Brant and Leslie Manookian, but I had to bring him back because we've got a Florida man story, and Brant is the right guy to talk about this. Ron DeSantis suspended a state attorney, which is sort of the district attorney function in Florida in their judicial districts. He suspended him for neglect of duty for declaring that he would refuse to prosecute cases under some new statutes regarding abortion and sex change operations for minors. Apparently Andrew Warren was unfamiliar with the Florida Constitution, Brant Hadaway. The rest of us found this pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny. I guess that, the only argument that he could make was that, well, I haven't neglected any duty yet. I mean, that's an argument that was made by one of the old guard Florida Republicans, Max Stepanovich, in response to this Twitter thread. Now, full disclosure, Max Stepanovich is one of my own father's old law partners, but he's a colleague with what's his name from the Lincoln Project, Wilson, whatever. But,
Rick Wilson, yeah.
Rick Wilson, yeah. But my rejoinder to that was, well, what if he announced in advance that he was not going to enforce laws against murder or rape? Would the governor have to wait to see what happens before he takes action? I think DeSantis made a good move here, a smart move politically, and that this may end up with the Senate removing the guy. We'll see what happens.
Well, and this is what's really interesting about this. And by the way, that wasn't your only response. I loved your response on Twitter to Andrew Warren directly, which was "Bye, Felicia." We're going to get to that in just a second because you said more than "Bye, Felicia," but I really did enjoy the "Bye, Felicia" one. But this argument that that people are making that, hey, first off, he hasn't neglected his duty yet, is rather absurd. I mean, his response was that the sheriff's office hadn't brought a case like this. None of these cases have been brought to us. We're not anticipating those cases being brought to us. You should go ask the sheriff whether he has had those cases and whether they're investigating arresting people for that, because when they do and they bring a case, we'll evaluate it. But he declared, he signed a petition declaring outright that he would refuse to prosecute such cases.
Mm-hmm. Right. I guess for the educated class, it's hard to wrap your minds around the fact. But people who break the law, which we used to call criminals, but I guess we're not allowed to say that anymore. But people who break the law tend to respond to incentives, just like anybody else. And you put out an incentive to say, if you break this law, you won't be prosecuted. Then what would be the point of the sheriff even bringing it, or what would be the point of even reporting it? So there is a necessary aspect of law enforcement in the role, when you're in the role of enforcing the law, to make sure you send a clear signal that this law will be enforced. If you break it, you will be punished. That's prosecutorial discretion may lead an individual prosecutor to treat individual cases differently, but to say outright, I'm not going to enforce this law, that's inviting all kinds of trouble. And to say, well, I haven't broken it yet, well, I haven't refused to enforce it yet because no case has been brought before me. I guess make that argument to the Senate or to the court in the inevitable lawsuit. We'll see what goes.
Well, right. Also lacks a certain testicular fortitude. He certainly was happy enough to sign the pledge when he thought that there were no consequences for it either, right? When the consequences arrived, all of a sudden it's like, well, I haven't made a decision yet.
Yeah, it's part of a bigger problem, of course, we're seeing with these Soros prosecutors. And some of them are most of them are local, but some statewide, like the Attorney General for the state of Michigan. I think she's one who is particularly egregious. She's totally political. She just politicizes every aspect of her job. And this is a very, very dangerous route we're going down. I think we talked about in our last discussion about the mask mandate, about how we're turning into a banana republic. And one part of that is how we've been increasingly seeing selective enforcement of the law. And this is something that really began with Obama, saying, well, I had prosecutorial discretion to ignore the law. No, you don't, buddy, champ. You have to enforce it in good faith. And that's the oath of office you took.
Right. And I want to get to this because I think this is a really dishonest argument, the whole idea of prosecutorial discretion applying to statutes. Prosecutorial discretion applies to cases.
Yes.
Right? And so if a prosecutor has a duty to represent the people, which includes at least to some extent the person being charged, right? Mm-hmm. And so in representing the people, they are tasked with making sure that a prosecution of this person under the statute doesn't result in some sort of miscarriage of justice, right? For one reason or another, mitigating factors, or the fact that maybe whatever the action was didn't really fit under the statute under which this person was charged. That is a duty of a prosecutor, and I think everybody understands that, right? I mean, I'm correct so far, right, Brant?
I think the easiest way to explain prosecutorial discretion, which is something that most people can relate to, is when you get pulled over for speeding, and the cop takes your license, they look at you, and he comes back to you and says, "Look, I'm going to cut you some slack this time and just give you a warning." That's your basic level prosecutorial discretion right there.
Right.
You don't look like somebody who's going to behave, if you're given just notice that you need to behave. That's prosecutorial discretion. That doesn't mean that the state isn't or the city isn't enforcing speed limits.
Right. Or parking issues or anything else like that.
Right. Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
It doesn't include, prosecutorial discretion does not include the authority for prosecutors, individual prosecutors, to simply decide that they don't like statutes and say and declare publicly that they don't plan to operate under these statutes, because, and again, I get back to this point, prosecutors are basically the attorneys we hire for ourselves under a system of self-governing regulations. We elect legislators to pass laws, executives to either sign off them or get overridden by veto overrides. And then we hire the prosecutors to represent us under the rules that we have established for self-governance. And so the prosecutor, as the attorney of the people who created these statutes, whether they like it or not, are duty-bound to enforce these statutes.
Yeah, and to me, it's even more fundamental that our constitutional order is based on the legislative branch making law in the executive branch, which is a prosecutor is a part of,
right?
Executive branch enforcing the law. And if prosecutors decide they don't like the laws and that the legislature has enacted and they're not going to enforce them, then our entire constitutional order breaks down. And you have a constitutional crisis of sorts on a level. And it was really necessary, I think. It wasn't just a good political move by DeSantis, but I think it was necessary for him to do what he did, to say, no, I'm reimposing the constitutional order here. Right. And you don't have the right to veto the laws. I do, subject to the legislature, but your job is to enforce them. So you say you're not going to enforce it, you're out. Okay, good.
Yeah. So this brings us to the Constitution, right? And I gotta read again. I gotta go back to Andrew Warren's response here, where he says, "I woke up to do my job today, and that's exactly what I did. Just based on the governor's track record with unconstitutional orders, I have a feeling that this is going to be just as unconstitutional." I'm curious as to why Andrew Warren, who's an attorney in good standing in the state of Florida, as well as being the elected prosecutor for the 13th Judicial District, which is, the Hillsborough County, as you well know, Hillsborough County, why he's not familiar with the Constitution, Article 4, Section 7. I mean, he's got a feeling this isn't constitutional. I mean, isn't it incumbent upon an attorney to actually, I don't know, do a little research, Brant? I'm sure that you wouldn't go out in front of the media and say, my client has been charged with this, and I really haven't looked up the law, but I have a feeling that this isn't right.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see what his argument is. I suppose his argument is going to be, well, I haven't neglected my duties yet.
Well, I mean, he did make that. He did make that argument explicitly. Yeah.
And consider the fact that he's going to have to bring that case, if he brings it, in the 13th Judicial Circuit of Florida, which is Hillsborough County. It's pretty conservative. The Intermediate Appellate Court is the Second District Court of Appeal, pretty conservative. And then you got the Florida Supreme Court, which right now the Constitution of the Florida Supreme Court is pretty conservative. And you have the Senate, who, I'm just looking at this Article 4 here, Section 7, Subpart B. The Senate may, in proceedings, remove from office or reinstate the suspended official.
Right.
I think the Senate's going to convene and remove the guy. I just, maybe they don't have the votes for it, but I just, I think the Senate is right now, as it's currently composed, is going to step in and say, you know what, the governor's right.
Yeah, 2316 Republican majority. Just for people who aren't aware, it's a 40-seat Senate. I think there's one missing at the moment, but Republicans hold 23 seats in a 40-seat chamber, and so yeah, I don't think there's any really good avenue here for Warren. But just to get back to the Constitution here, I mean, there's a lot of talk about prosecutorial discretion here. This is a case of gubernatorial discretion. The state constitution grants the governor the authority to suspend these officials, and that's state officials or county officials, which of course, the state attorney is in this case, based on his own discretion, based on his own discretion as to whether or not a neglect of duty is taking place, or any of the other. I mean, there's lots of other grounds here. You've got malfeasance, misfeasance, drunkenness, incompetence, permanent inability, commission of a felony. I mean, you can maybe even include, malfeasance, and if he hasn't read the Constitution, maybe even incompetence. I mean, the guy's been in office for 5 years, a little over 5 years, 5.5 years, and if he's not aware of this section of the Constitution, I find that a really interesting argument to competence. But I mean, neglect of duty is clearly what. But he's the
by
authority.
the way, that article has been invoked numerous times. I mean, here in Miami-Dade County, it would be hard to keep track of how many local officials have been removed from office under that section of the Florida Constitution, either for incompetence or they've been charged with a crime, or any number of reasons.
Right.
Why? So it's nothing new.
Well, and the governor, it's a plenary authority of the governor to do this. He can't remove them from office, but he can suspend them, which is exactly what DeSantis did. That's gubernatorial discretion. That's actually, a legal exercise. Even without characterizing it as a good exercise, it's a legal exercise of gubernatorial discretion, much more so than the claim of prosecutorial discretion by Warren and other progressive prosecutors who just simply refuse to enforce laws, and broadly refuse to enforce laws. And there is a check on that power, but it's the Senate. And this is my question: is I'm sure he's going to try to sue DeSantis to get reinstated, but I think even outside of Hillsborough County, right? And there might be a recusal in Hillsborough County too. I think the first judge that gets in front of this and says, maybe you can take this over to a neighboring district because maybe we're a little too involved in this. But we can talk about possibilities of that too. But I think any court's going to look at this and say, this is not a legal matter, this is a political matter, and your only avenue here is to go back to the state Senate and ask to be reinstated.
Yeah, and I think that's how my response as a judge would be, that it looks to me like your remedy is under Section 7 is in the Senate. It's not here in court. So, and it's at the discretion of the Senate. So there's nothing for me to do about it. I can't give you any relief. And I just wanted to make one other point. I think that this whole thing goes to the way DeSantis has come to see his role as governor. And I had the pleasure of meeting with him a few months ago, and he's really, really intelligent, just incredibly. He's just absorbs information. He has emerged from this whole COVID mess as someone who sees his role as governor as in the way that the framers of our Constitution saw it, as a defender of liberty. And his part of that role as a defender of liberty is to defend our constitutional order, and that's what he's doing here. And I think that's brilliant. Just for myself as a constitutional conservative, I love it, but it also works great politically. It's gonna, I think, I know it's gonna go over great here in Miami-Dade County.
You know, I'm kind of curious about that myself, because when I was writing about this yesterday, when DeSantis actually announced this, right, the big announcement, because Christine Pushaw had been saying, oh, the liberal heads will be exploding. This was on Wednesday night when she's saying, when she's
brilliant. I love her.
She's great. And Christine, if you're watching, hello. I'd love to talk to you, by the way, Christine, if you're watching.
Yeah, Christine, please give me a follow on Twitter when you get a chance.
Yeah, same here. But at any rate, I didn't know what that was referring to on Wednesday, but clearly this was, she wasn't overselling this. This is a big, huge, major thing. And, Warren is saying today that, he's trying to impress the, caucus voters in Iowa. Well, yeah, probably. I mean, sure. I don't doubt that this is part of his plan to pitch himself as the next real Republican leader ahead of the 2024 primaries. I mean, I don't doubt that at all. What I was kind of curious about, Brant, was how this was going to be received in this election cycle, because of course he's running for re-election. And I'm not sure. I suspected that it will still be a net positive for him, but I wasn't sure exactly how that would lay out in Florida. Maybe you can tell me a little bit about how you think that this is actually going to impact the gubernatorial election, which he has. I mean, first off, he's way ahead. He's going to win this, and he needs to win it if he wants to make a claim for running in 2024.
Oh, well, I can only speak for kind of my own social circle, right? But
right.
I think that certainly South Florida Hispanics, they appreciate an alpha male move. And this is definitely an alpha male move. As far as the rest of the electorate, your white non-Hispanic conservatives are going to love it because they are pro-life and they are deeply suspicious of this whole transgender movement, which, by the way, has just destroyed so many lives. If you just go on Twitter and look for some of the Twitter handles of some of these detransitioners of young women who transitioned and had organs removed and had hormone replacement therapy when they were children and now regret it. It just breaks your heart to see this stuff. And it should be criminal to perform these procedures on minors. And so I think there's definitely going to be a liberal element in this state, as in any state, that he will never win. And but I think for the constituents, for the people that like him and appreciate him, I think this is just going to make them love him more and make them more motivated.
Right. And I think I want to address one more thing here too with you, and I think we've kind of bounced around it. We just haven't addressed it explicitly. But the claim that this is an authoritarian move by Ron DeSantis to restore the proper constitutional rule of law in the 13th Judicial District. I mean, I find that laughable. The proper rule of law here is for prosecutors to follow the law as it's written. I mean, I think that people have been yelling authoritarian for so long that it's almost like crying wolf anyway. But in this particular case, this is an absurd argument. The authoritarian here was Andrew Warren.
Exactly. I mean, what DeSantis did was anti-authoritarian, because he's an authoritarian is an executive who acts lawlessly, arbitrarily and capriciously. And DeSantis came in and said, no, we have something called the rule of law here, and I'm going to restore it. So this was the opposite of authoritarian, if you ask me.
I did, and that's the reason why I wanted to. I knew you were going to give me that response too, but I wanted to make sure we got it as part of the record. All right, Brant Hadaway. I first off appreciate you doing this on darn near a moment's notice here this morning, but it's just such a fun story, and I loved your Bye Felicia thing on Twitter. And where can people find that? How do they find you on Twitter?
Just my name, Brant Hadaway. That's it. No,
well, there you go.
Brant Brant Hadaway.
And DavillierLawGroup.com, DAVILLIER, lawgroup.com is where you can find where Brant is working from. And eventually StrangeWomenLyingInPonds.com will come back. I say this every time I get Brant on here, but it's such a fun site, and eventually we'll get you back. I swear we'll get you back, Brant.
All right, man. Well, I guess I'll still have to keep my day job, though.
I think you probably will. And thank goodness, because we're going to keep watching that CDC case too, and you're doing great work in there. And if you missed, I think it was Monday's podcast, go back to Monday's podcast, because we had a great conversation with Brant Hadaway and Leslie Manukian of the Health Freedom and Defense Fund, healthfreedomdefense.org. And you can find out all the great work that he's doing, because in large part because he's not blogging anymore. So, we can't complain about it too much, Brant.
Oh, well.
All right. Well, thanks for being with us, Brant Hadaway. Stay tuned for a little more from the Ed Morrissey Show. Thank you for watching and listening to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. Be sure to subscribe at Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube to get alerted as soon as new episodes get published. You can support the Ed Morrissey Show and Hot Air's VIP reporting by becoming a VIP member, too. Visit hotairvip.com and use the promo code SAVEAMERICA, all one word, for 40% off your membership. Choose VIP Gold and gain membership to access to all of the Town Hall sites. Thanks again for watching and listening.